Okay, so I promised you all I was going to do a little video that talked about how to buy a cheap house in a county that's not really that affordable. Now, I know I always talk about just getting up and moving to a county that's a little bit more affordable. I know loads of you don't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. So for those of you still clinging on to the hope that you're going to be able to afford houses in these more expensive counties, these are the things that I kept in mind when I was looking for my place. The most important thing you need to keep in mind is that I did not find a cheap house in Wexford when I was looking for one. I ultimately had to move. So you need to take all this advice with a little bit of a pinch of salt, and you need to still keep your head screwed on a bit and realize that it's not necessarily a given that you're going to end up being able to live in the county you really want to live in just because you really, really want to live in it. Because honestly, that's not the way it works, and I would much rather see you guys in houses and moving on with your lives and raising your families and just kind of getting on with life in somewhere half an hour away from home than being in rentals or like sleeping on your parents' couches for the next 10 years. So let's get started. Okay, so the first one I want to talk to you about is when you're looking for houses and you're really struggling in the standard sections of the portal websites. You're looking at things like detached houses, semi-detached houses, picking out how many bedrooms you want and stuff like that. You need to maybe broaden your scope a little bit. You need to look in the building sites section. Now, it's not necessarily a given that you want to build. I didn't want to build, so I'm not saying it like that. But what you can do is, if you actually search in the sites section, a lot of them will have like a little aerial photo, or they'll have a plan from Ordnance Survey, and you'll be able to see from them whether there's actually an existing building on that site. So a lot of the time, estate agents and owners will sell properties as building sites just because they think the house isn't really in good enough condition to sell it as a house. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't buy the site and do up the house on it and not knock it down and clear it and build something brand new on it. So when you're in the portals, you need to go to your advanced search and you need to go down to where it says keywords, and you need to put in the word ruin, for example, or derelict or something like that. And what that does is it'll bring you up any listings that have the word ruin mentioned in them. Now, all the portals don't do this. And honestly, with the building site section, if you're up to date on it yourself, you're checking it often enough, you organise it by the most recent, you're going to know when 3 new ones come on, and it's not going to be a massive job to have a look at them if they're in your area, which they kind of would be because that's the whole point of this video. You can drive out and have a look at them and see maybe is there any kind of an old building on it. And that's something I really, really recommend. So look in building site sections as well as the main sections, and make sure that if you're familiar with the area, that you're going to go and have a look and see if there's any kind of a ruin, any kind of a derelict cottage or anything like that hidden away in the trees in the back of it. Right, so on the same note as that, there's a thing with portal sites as well where they'll have a section squirreled away for commercial buildings and commercial properties, and agricultural land generally is filtered into that section. Now, when people sell farms, they'll normally sell it in lots. So you'll have maybe 10 acres on one road might go, and then 7 acres on another road might go together, and then the farmhouse and the outbuildings and maybe 1 acre will go on their own. They're still sold in the farm section. So you don't really know, to be honest, whether they're there or not unless you look in the farm section. And a lot of the time when people sell farms, they're quite willing to split the house and the outbuildings and maybe a half an acre or an acre away from the land, because a lot of the times farmers who buy the land don't really want the hassle of having another house that they have to mind, and the people who buy the houses don't really want 100 acres and they don't want to pay the premium for that. So what you end up having is a big massive farm that could very easily be just split away from the building, and you could buy one and somebody else could buy the other. That's what happened here with my house. My house was bought by a local farmer when he was buying the land, and the house just kind of sat here for years, just going kind of derelict because he didn't really have any use for it. And then he ended up deciding to sell it on, and that's when I bought it. But it had already kind of gone through the hands of like the person who owned it originally, and then him when he was buying agricultural land. And really, if you keep an eye on those agricultural listings, you might find a little cottage somewhere or a farmhouse that someone's willing to split away from the main farm. Okay, so this is a big one, right? If you're buying a house in a county that's quite expensive, you need to be prepared to buy a way more derelict house than those of us in the more affordable counties are going to have to buy. So like when I was in Wexford, I was looking at everything from a pile of stones in the corner of a field that was being sold as a cottage to even farm buildings that were being sold as cottages when they clearly weren't cottages. And you end up kind of having to open your mind a little bit more to like the level of work you're going to have to do. I mean, the good thing in a way is that there shouldn't be a massive discrepancy between the price you're going to pay a tradesman in, let's say, maybe Kilkenny compared to Offaly or Tipperary. They're still quite close by to each other, where Kilkenny might be a more expensive county and you might be paying more for the site that the cottage is on. You might be paying more for the house in general. The work itself should still be fairly reasonable to do, or at least should be comparable to what it costs in other counties. So it's not really a massive thing to do more work. If you're getting in and you're doing up a place anyway, to be honest, it kind of just gives you a little bit more freedom to do something way more to your own tastes. So definitely look at the ones that are more derelict. Don't be just going, oh, that's a lovely 3-bedroom, 2-story farmhouse and it has 25 outbuildings and 3 acres, and sure, I'll just go and look at them because that's what I want to live in. Like, that's not going to happen. You need to be looking at farmhouses that have half the side pulled off them because someone wanted to drive a tractor into it and park it in there. This is the kind of stuff you have to look at. You have to really open your mind. I mean, I've been looking at ones in Wexford years ago and they were crazy. Like when I look at what's available outside of Wexford, I think, what was I thinking? That I was going to go and do that much work. But honestly, if it's something where you absolutely can't move or you absolutely don't want to even entertain leaving the county you're in, you need to open your mind up to these properties. Another thing to keep in mind when the kind of amount of houses that are out there are quite slim and you're not really seeing a lot of them come up very often, the majority of them that are really there in a county are maybe already done up or they cost a fortune. The thing you have to keep in mind there is look at things like commercial buildings. So like I'm not talking like factories and stuff like that, but let's say look at like shops that have little residential areas above them. Look at places like that. You know, even look at pubs that don't have licenses anymore. They mightn't necessarily have been the best place for a pub in the past, or maybe like road layouts have changed and there's not really footfall anymore to still have it as a pub. So it's kind of a really inconvenient building. But the bones of the building was probably an old 19th, 18th century farmhouse that they just turned into a pub. And like, you could actually really use these buildings a lot better than they're being used at the moment. I see loads of pubs and loads of shops that are just left to go derelict as pubs and shops, and nobody ever kind of goes, Jesus, I could turn that back into a house, or I could turn that back into a little terrace, or I could do something like that. So look at commercial buildings, not just big massive mills and factories and stuff. I'm talking small commercial buildings that again may be listed in commercial sections of the portals and stuff, and see, could you legally and could you get planning permission to convert them back into residential spaces and maybe use them to live in. I think definitely it opens up another avenue when there aren't too many houses coming on the market where you live. Okay, another one is contact people whose houses aren't for sale. Now, I know that kind of sounds crazy, and I don't mean, oh, that person's living in that house and I really want to own it. I'm just going to go and knock on the door and go, can you sell me your house? I'm not talking about that. But there's a way where you can search the land registry and find out who owns certain folios of land, and you can get in touch with them politely and you can ask them if they would be willing to sell the house. Now, I only advise it for houses that aren't being lived in at the moment, okay? But if you do it and somebody says yes, there is a good chance that you might be able to buy the house at a decent price without having a bidding war and without having to deal with estate agents and stuff like that. It could just be you and the person who owns the house negotiating between yourselves to find a price that suits the both of you, and you're taking a house off of their hands that they maybe were left, they didn't really know what to do with, they didn't really think it was of any value, and and then you get a house at the end of it, which will be super. Now, my biggest tip for doing this when you're looking up houses and you get the results is get in touch with people who don't live in Ireland, because generally if somebody who lives in America has a house like this and it's not being lived in, it's not being taken care of, there's a fairly good chance that it was left to them. They may have never been in Ireland. They may have never seen the house in their lives. They may never have any intention of ever coming back over, but they also may have no idea that the house is worth anything to anybody. So prioritizing houses like that is a really, really good idea, because you can get in touch with people who got randomly left houses by great-great-grandfathers and stuff who've no interest in them, and also maybe don't have a massive amount of knowledge of how much houses are worth in your county. So you might maybe be able to get a bargain. Now, I've done a video about how to find out who owns a house that's not for sale. I'll link it below. If you've watched it already, go back and watch it again and you'll be able to find out exactly what to do here. Okay, my last piece of advice on this is kind of a no-brainer, but I'm going to say it anyway. Be prepared to play the waiting game. Don't assume that you're going to like snap up a bargain really, really quickly if the budget you have is a lot lower than everybody else's. But also, you know, keep in mind that, you know, house prices change. The property market comes down as well as going up. So there's every chance that if you just dig your heels in and stay there and rough it for a little bit longer, something might change in your favor. Now, this is 100% not something I was willing to do when I was buying my house, because I was like trying to work from home and I was struggling with it. And it was just one of those things where I needed to be somewhere where I could at least keep myself warm and things like that when I was working. So I didn't really have that luxury, but some people do. And definitely if you're really, really wanting to just dig in and stay in the county you're in, save up your deposit. Keep saving once you have it and just bide your time. Get to know the estate agents. Keep doing searches in your area. Keep checking on land registry, and, you know, whenever you can afford it, maybe try and get contact details of other houses that aren't for sale, and just wait and wait and wait. And hopefully you might get one. And if you don't, it is not the end of the world. You can always still leave your county. Our country is tiny. One end of it to the other is the equivalent of where people like drive for like weekends away in other countries. So this country is so tiny. It's so small, and you really are not ever going to be that far away from your family, no matter where you live here. So best of luck with it, and let me know below if you have any more questions or if there's any other videos you want me to do, and I will try my best to get them done. Bye.